Right now, we understand hundreds of thousands of people are living in the open air as a result of having no shelter to go to. Basically, what's been happening over the last several days, as you know, 60,000 aid workers were dispatched to the southeastern part of this country. They took blankets with them. They took tents as well. But they were just overwhelmed, understandably, by the numbers, the sheer scale of this disaster. So some 400,000 people, at least that we know of so far, are receiving aid from the government directly. And yet folks say that they haven't gone far enough. When President Erdogan addressed the situation on Wednesday, he said there was no way to plan for a disaster of this scale. But the anger here in this country, I have to tell you, is growing. And that's not just as a direct result of the search and rescue, which has seemingly stalled over the last 24 hours or so in terms of the lives saved, but also as a result of people looking at this situation and saying the scale and scope of the devastation is such that there's no way that the government isn't in some way to blame. And that's because when you look at these buildings, if you look at that footage, they look as if they've fallen in almost like a house of cards, this kind of destruction. There are building codes that have been put in place since 1999, since a similar earthquake in Marmara took place, that many say have not been followed. And that was due to corruption, due to municipal and federal authorities looking the other way, if you will, and not enforcing strict building codes. So yes, the anger is growing, and sadly the numbers are growing as well. Over 20,000 people now have been declared dead as a result of these quakes, not just in the southwestern or southeastern part of this country, but also in northwestern Syria. I do want to mention, finally, an aid convoy from the UN was able to get into that northwestern corner of the country yesterday. They were able to bring in supplies. It's the first UN aid convoy that's been allowed to pass over into Syria. There's been a lot of discussion between Syrian government authorities and NGOs and other member countries as well about how that aid should be delivered. They say that it has to go through them, and folks that we've spoken to on the NGO level at least have said that this is detrimental to the situation simply because of the scale of the devastation. We're talking 4 million people in that part of the country that have been impacted, at least so far. Now, later this morning, we're going to speak to a member of the White Helmets. That's an organization that's been working in Syria since Monday, since these quakes took place. They've been trying to save as many people as possible. So we'll get a better sound on what's happening in that area from the White Helmets a little later on in the morning. But in terms of the scale and the scope of this devastation, sadly, the numbers are expected to grow. In terms of the death toll, we're already seeing it hitting above 20,000. We know at least 41,000 plus people have been injured as a result of this, many of them evacuated to Istanbul and to Ankara, but still seeking medical attention on the ground. Aid groups have been able to get into the southeastern part of Turkey over the last several days. But the anger, as I say, is growing. Folks on the ground there essentially telling our colleagues at NBC News that when the government did arrive, they came with the wrong equipment and that they were not prepared for the scale and the scope of this disaster.